Hi, Ed.
Hey, Vasco, how are you?
I'm good. It's been a week. Whoa, I don't. What did we talk about like last week? I don't even remember.
We did touch base on the little bit of research we were doing about how we come up with the chapter structure. Then we were discussing the landing pages
Oh, yeah, that
about
was
how
it.
do we
Landing
test,
pages.
yeah, and how do we actually use the landing pages as a test mechanism to put our ideas out there and see like if if people find it useful and stuff like that.
In fact, that's a great, or that's a great segue into what we want to talk about this week, which is also about testing ideas. I remember early on when we started talking about writing this book, you talked about having an SMIQ done, the single most important question survey done. Do you remember that, Ed?
Yes, yes. So what we did was before, so we created a webinar, uh, like a I think few minutes, 40 minutes long, and we did talk about like, hey, we are working on this idea of how you can follow our method of publishing books and write a book for yourself that will help you get invited to speak at conferences because actually no, just will help you write a book. And
Yeah,
then
that was before the invitation for
yes,
conferences.
yeah, because that was the result of the survey. So what we did was we put up a survey together with asking like, when it comes to authoring the book, or and what do you want to like, what's the single biggest challenge, and what is it that you're trying to accomplish as a result of authoring that book. So those were the two main things that we asked people. And I think like 100 or 200 people filled that up. So I traveled to Helsinki and had a like 3 day workshop with Vasco in uh, that scenario, and we put all of these surveys and them together in the results, categorized them in broad categories, put up. Actually, let me share my screen. That what came out from this was um, pretty much what is marked on this page.
Yeah,
So
so this is kind of our interpretation of the results of the SMIQ. That's Jennifer at the center, and then we have around Jennifer, we have phrases that Jennifer says about what she thinks and feels, what she hears, what she sees, what she does, and of course some of the pains and the gains that came out through that SMIQ survey.
yeah, and that actually led us to create, first identify the biggest pain that we wanted to handle and that we had experience in, and that not other people are talking about, and that was how to use the fact that you have a book, you're an author, to get invited to speak at conferences. Because ultimately what people wanted to build was an authority. They want to be in demand, and they wanted to maybe raise higher prices, they want to be consultants, but on all of them the common theme was to get invited
Yeah,
to
so
speak
I
at
remember
conferences.
that some of the people who answered were consultants who wanted to either get more clients or have a higher fee, but there were also employees who wanted to become consultants and also employees that wanted to grow their career, right? They wanted
Yeah,
to uh, either get another job or get more responsibilities, a raise, that kind of thing.
yeah. And we identified that going to conferences trump everything, like it solves almost every problem.
Yeah,
So
it's kind of
it's
the tool for all of those goals, right?
yeah, yeah. And that was for us the aha moment coming out of that survey, that like, okay, this is what our book will be about. So we had the vague idea we want to write a book about writing a book, but the whole structure came out of this survey. And in the end, it looks like this, what we discovered. So Vasco, would you like to just have a
Yeah.
brief
So
about
this
what
is this is the story map, and you will notice that at the top of this there's three red squares, and the three red squares are the thoughts that Jennifer goes through as she progresses with the writing process. So the first is you are an expert, you just don't know it yet. So that's what part one of the book is about sharing stories of people who became experts and recognized authorities in their field, and then The next is kind of the bulk of the book. It's most of the tools and techniques we are going to share, and that is that you are an author. You just don't know it yet, because one of the pains we had is was and it was in that empathy map you were showing at, which was I don't know how to write a book, right? And if you don't know how to write a book or how to publish a book or how to market the book, so we need to talk about those. So the first part is explaining the process of writing so that the reader, the person who reads our book, becomes confident in that, right? But it needs to be actionable. It needs to be really concrete, like really, do this and then do that and so on. And of course, as all methods, you can always improve it as you go. But we share that method that we collected over this, and the specific I would say characteristic for me, it's the key selling point of this method is that you can get most of the book structured. You can have the first few chapters written in less than 48 hours. That's the 48-hour workshop we talk about in the book. It is what we did for this book. So that's what is in that second part. You're an author, you just don't know it yet. And then the last part is that you're an expert author. So that brings the two parts together. But then it adds one more, which was also one of the pains, which is others don't know it yet. So, right. So this is the part where we talk about how you market the book, how you set up the selling of the book, how you launch it, and finally, how you get invited to speak at conferences by using that book. So kind of that's the structure we came out based on the empathy map and the SMIQ.
Yeah, and just a quick glance at how the survey in action goes looks like. So this is something a tool I'm using, Bucket.io. You don't have to use it. So far, I've been using Google Forms, but the survey looks like this. The results, people will answer. Some are hyper, some are non-hyper. So the idea is to pay attention to the hypers, the one which are in yellow, because they are the most engaged people. And then these will tell you what your audience or the people who are attracted to you, your wordings, your messaging are actually struggling with. So you don't have to solve every problem on earth. You just solve their problem because they are in your reach. So that was the um, just an example how this came up. In the survey that
Yeah.
I just showed you is an early stage of another book that's in the writing. I don't have a date ETA for that book, but it's an initiated process, and I'll just leave it open until I get enough material, enough surveys done while I'm writing this book.
Yeah. And now in the 48-hour book method, we are now talking about chapter 2. And now if we look at the map, we have part 1, you're an expert, you just don't know it yet. We have the user goals. So Jennifer wants to be able to, after reading the first part of the book, trust that she's an expert and understand how a book can help her reach her goals. That's what we want the user to achieve after reading part 1. And now we're talking about chapter 2, which is so that we can help Jennifer learn how a book can help her build reputation as an expert. So that's actually what we are talking about today, right, Ed?
Yes, that's correct. So
All right.
I'll
So
bring this
you
up.
are writing chapter 2 right now. What are you struggling with?
Um, yeah, so a couple of things. One, because we took a long break uh, from writing, so putting together our thoughts, and we started with the chapters that we haven't written before, and chapter 2 was one of them. So, and the reason why I haven't written it before was because this is more like a thinking type of chapter where I have to give like logical and emotional reasons rather than a how-to style, which later chapters are, which were easier to write. So that's why we kept it for later. So now, because this is more like a logical and emotional topic, like learn how a book can help you build reputation as an expert. Uh, it involves expert, reputation, and a book. There are three things. How they are logically connected and why this is the superior way. Um, so there are too many different angles and ways that I could start and put in. I've actually written a lot of lot of this chapter and discarded what I've written mostly because I was not finding that strong angle. But following up from one of the interviews that we had, like a discussion like this, we had like 2 weeks ago. You suggested me to go with kind of an action scene to begin with and stuff. So I have come up with a logical um, angle of how I'm coming to this argument. And I would like to discuss it today and see what you think in the live, because I haven't discussed it with you before. I would like to see your reaction here. So,
Let's dive into it.
cool, perfect. So, what I'm trying to build a logical argument that one, the the stories that you tell are important, and then book is the best medium to tell stories. Basically, stories is a technology, and book is another technology to store those stories. And the third one is what was the third one? uh, oh yeah, okay. So what angle you should be taking in a book that will make you stand out as an expert, like your book will raise hands like this person is an expert. So those are the three things that I have written, and the logic goes like this. I have covered stories of, or not stories, actually history, very very recent discovery, as recent as 2017. Like a research was done between 2010 and 2017 of the history of the world, that there has been a civilization before 12,000 years ago, and there are some traces of it. We haven't discovered it enough to have a mainstream books written about those, but this is good enough to connect the dots that almost all the mythologies, all the major ancient mythologies, all the ancient stories divided by geography has some common elements in their stories. And those elements came from the stories that were passed on from before those 12,000 years ago, whatever civilization that existed that sent, well, by the way, a meteorite struck Earth 12,000 years ago. And the Earth was in dust for 1,000 years, 12,000 years ago. And that was the discovery that we had in 2017, and there was a research going on from 2010 to 2017. So that is an ideal apocalypse scenario, that we actually, humanity survived this apocalypse for 1,000 years, and the technology or anything that existed before, and there are some proofs of this, um, didn't exist anymore. And there's no trace for us to be able to build back those things. But what survived was a lot of information about astrology in mythological stories and histories. Like, for example, if you go to ancient Indian stories from Ramayana and the holy books, they were written like thousands of years ago. And a lot of those stories are the same which are found in Latin America, South American civilizations like Incas and Mayas, and the same in Mesopotamia and stuff like that. So the story is a technology to pass on the information to the next generation, and it has
To
proven to be
store
true.
information over generations, right?
Over generation, yes, exactly. So the characters change, the the core morals change, but the stories, like the knowledge is passed on through stories, and that's the single most reliable way for. And actually, according to the book Sapiens, that's the only reason why humans are humans compared to animals, that we form stories, we tell each other stories and gossips, and that differentiate us from monkeys. For example, a monkey will see a lion, they'll make a sound that the lion is by the, like, they saw a lion, and everyone else, like in the community, monkey community, will just run away from there. But they don't have the ability to talk that the lion came here or this time of the day, or every week the lion comes here to drink water at this time of the day, and then let's strategize around it. Humans can do it because of stories, that we can communicate past and
So,
future.
so we are at the point where we understand that stories are incredibly powerful to convey information, and of course to store information. So memory.
Memory, and this is core to humanity. So the stories are important, and stories doesn't mean that they follow the Hollywood structure or a method. Stories, anything, include past and the future that we passed on to people, right? So that one thing. And then out of all the ways of storing technology, verbal communication, verbal passing on hasn't been that reliable because the stories change over time when they are passed on verbally. So the books, since the invention of the books, they have been a single most reliable source of passing on the stories. It's not the technology, it's not the internet, it's not the all of these could disappear in a single like apocalypse. Uh, we just are experiencing COVID. Like imagine a blackout
There will be
of
lots of
electricity.
stories written about COVID, by the way.
I
I'm
can
pretty sure
imagine.
that next year many Hollywood movies will be about the COVID-19 situation in of 2020.
Yeah, it's funny. I was imagining, like, look, they were imagining, Hollywood was imagining these stories, but none of them in their movies show people keeping 2 meter distance apart. And that was the first thing happened. Like in all apocalypse, even zombie apocalypse movies where people
Yeah,
are just like coming,
everybody's huddled
everybody is
together
cramped and close
somehow.
together. It's like, wow, how the reality
And
is
now
like.
we have to live with that. So in some way that those will become part of the stories as well. The stories we tell ourselves.
Also, the the identity. So, there's a feeling of personal. I don't know how to say personal space, that bubble that we keep around us, that has actually extended, and I don't know if it will come back. Maybe it will come back a little
I
bit.
live in Finland, so we already had
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that.
It's going to affect us in ways that we don't. But anyway, coming back to the technology point, that's why books and what's written in books have always hold a special place, consciously or subconsciously, in our minds.
Yeah, and now we need to help Jennifer take advantage of this realization. So the logical argument, as you were saying, is books are a great way to convey and store information across generations. Great. Now Jennifer is thinking, okay, but how can this book help me become recognized as an expert?
Yeah. So far I have developed one, I have noted down one of the things that definitely we need to do, and that is, when you, like, most people think that they don't have things that others will listen to them. This is classic example of an imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is what my other book that I just showed you the survey about is all about. It's purely about this feeling, this nagging feeling that I'm not good enough, my story is not good enough, or my experience isn't good enough to share with people, and that stop us from standing up, being bold, and showing up ourselves as what we are. We actually get scared of what others will think of us, and then we don't share our stories. Contrary to that, like your opinion, things that are small, tiny, but they're different from what everyone else thinks, your observations, they are very valuable, because other people are also kind of living in the auto mode, and they don't see it coming. And case in point is, what that would want to talk in the rest of this discussion is your book. Um, but what you need to give is is a moment through your book, and that moment is this changes everything moment. So if you can create this changes everything, and we have it every day, like so many things that we do, we have those this changes everything moments. All you have to do is something that you observed to in your work, in the way things are being done, and how it can be done differently, or how it can be, how you've done it differently, or how you saw somebody do it differently.
So in this case, it would be for Jennifer, who's professional in some area, in some field, whatever that is, engineering, scientific, medical, marketing, sales, whatever that, accounting, whatever that is. Jennifer then has probably collected a lot of experience over time, and she's found a way to do certain things faster and easier because of her experience, right? Well, if you struggle long enough with the same problem, you figure out a way to do it faster and better. So that's kind of the core message here, right? That thing that you have found that helps you has the potential to help many others out there. And if you are able to share it, just like it was for you, it will change everything for them. And of course, at that time, establish you as an expert in that field. Is that the argument you want to make?
It doesn't necessarily need to change everything, as long as it give them a solid challenge to their past thinking, that's good enough. As long as you can put up an argument that at least make them think strongly, or doubt the ways, they don't need to take an action necessarily for you to be established as an expert. The moment you stand for something, you are an expert. So that's the argument. And now I went a little bit operational, in the sense that, like, me as a host of virtual summits, the way I select speakers, and a lot of some summits I've done are in the industries I don't know anything about. So I go with, like, I have to very quickly find experts in that industry. So I don't have the advantage of following some people, some blogs, like, for a long time, so I know which one is like real deep expert and not. And the same is for event organizers. They jump from one event to another, and their topic is like, they have a challenge of bringing in fresh topics every single time. How do they find it? Here's how I find it. I go to Amazon and look at books. It doesn't matter if the books are bestseller, if they have never sold a copy, doesn't really matter. I don't look at reviews first. I just look at the topics, the names, the pictures of the book. Is it something that sounds like this changes everything moment? Will it make my conference exciting? And I think that's where I think we should discuss about your book, No Estimates, because No Estimate is a perfect example of this changes everything moment. So, Vasco, how did you come up with the idea of No Estimates? What was your journey like?
Yeah. So, as a project manager for many years, I was constantly struggling with this "we're always late" problem, right? And for all of us who have been project managers, we know that typically you discover you are late, too late, and then it's very hard to recover. And because it is very hard to recover, you end up with late, over budget projects, frustrated people, death march projects. Death march projects are a very big thing in the IT world. There's even a book called Death March, which talks about a similar project. So Death March basically means that we are working as hard as we can. We still don't make enough progress, and we have very little visibility as to whether we can still make the deadline or not. We typically don't. And then the question is, how far beyond the deadline do we go before the project is dead, right? Death march. The idea is that my idea was that there must be a way to avoid this anti-pattern, right? And I started experimenting with several things. The thing that worked the best for me was to reduce scope, so remove stuff from the project in order to meet a particular deadline. And I was working with products at that time that were date centric, so they were completely date bound. They're like, a Christmas product that is released in January is useless because the market is gone, right? So that's an example. Or tax software that is released after tax season has started is not a good idea because it's too late to sell. Everybody else already bought the tax software they wanted. So that was the problem I was struggling with. And at some point, I stumbled upon this idea of just counting items that are in what our teams call backlogs, right? So lists of things that we need to do. We count those. We measure the rate of progress over time. And that is enough information for us to make informed decisions about what not to include in the project. Because at the end of the day, that was my realization. The biggest lever we have to release on time, to put a product out on time, is to decide what not to do. And by the way, this is nothing new. This is applicable in many other fields, like in strategy, right? Strategy is about deciding what not to do. There's even famous quotes about that, right? Prioritization is about saying no to almost everything, right? So, like all of those things. And this is kind of an instance of the idea that Taleb calls via negativa. And the idea of via negativa is that the biggest impact we can have in our own reality, so in this case, in our projects, in our work, is to say no, right? That's the biggest impact. So instead of saying yes, if we say no to the right things, we're going to get more time to do the things we want to do. And that's where no estimates emerged. It was about, okay, so how do we get a simple way, simple but effective, to say no so that people understand that we really need to say no to those things? Because the traditional approach is that we just say yes to more things, right? let's say we start with a project that is 3 months long, and then we started adding stuff and adding stuff and adding stuff. And 6 months later, we were 3 months late with the project and we were still adding stuff, right? But nobody could say no because there was no clear reason to say no. So once we started counting the number of items we said yes to and then projecting that over time, we found out that, okay, at some point we've said yes to too many things. Now we need to say no, right? And that conversation is what changes everything. But the trigger for that conversation is this concept that I describe in the book, which is one of the no estimates approaches, which is to count the things you need to do over time. And if you're listening to this, you can try it in your own life. If you write down the number of tasks you have to do during a day, and you do that over several weeks, you will see that you will oscillate between a few numbers. Like, let's say, in my case, it's maybe 5 to 14 tasks per day, but it's always about the same. It doesn't oscillate very much, right? Sometimes you go above, sometimes you go below, but it's about that time. So we found this constant if we go to process theory and so on, there's terminology for that, but we found this constant. The amount of things we do in a period of time is reasonably stable. And then we were able to start the conversations about what we say no to. And this became a big thing, not because it is difficult or simple or whatever it is, but it became a big thing because, just as you said, it challenged one of the major assumptions in project management. Project management, one-on-one. You list what you need to do, you estimate what you need to do, and then you put that on a sequence, which is the project plan, and then you know when you're going to be done.
Yeah.
Well, what we said is, you already know when you need to be done. Now just list everything you need to do, count how many of those things you get done per week, project that over time, and that's it. Do not estimate anything, just count them, right?
Yeah. I
And
mean,
and
it's
that caused such a big controversy that the topic became important in the software development community.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, you've got a background in project management. I've got a background in project management of nuclear and thermal power plants, oil and petroleum pipelines and stuff. Project management. Everywhere, the whole industries are aligned. And if you look at the job roles, people are competing to prove that they're building their competencies on estimates. They're building their competencies on staying around the estimates. They're better than other people on estimates and stuff. And here's what Vasco is saying, like, hey, what if we don't even need estimates? Like, this whole fight doesn't even need to exist. We can be more efficient without doing it. And nobody is saying that. Nobody's thinking that. There are universities set up in teaching people different technology, different methods of estimates and whatnot. It's like, doesn't help.
So
In my experience, no project ever finishes or like happens in exactly the same way with the same estimate that you begin with. So why even fight for it?
yeah, finding a different approach, which actually leads me to a question. So you start chapter 2, which is what we are talking about. You start chapter 2 with a story that I think is one of those that changes everything. You start talking about, I went to university, I did my MBA, and I learned sales and marketing from these professors, but I never really realized that they had no experience. They had been academics all their lives. And I think that is a great hook for Jennifer, because that is when you finally realize, wait a minute, are you telling me that I learned my job from people who never did it? Well, in most cases, that's correct, especially if you learned it in a school rather than through an apprenticeship program. And this is what we are saying. And actually, you say that in chapter 2. I think that's very powerful, which is that, Jennifer, you already have the experience. You're actually better than the teachers who never actually did the work that you did. And everybody considers them experts. Why wouldn't they consider you expert? Right. And I think I think that part is powerful in chapter 2. And I think that we can make it even better, kind of maybe illustrate it with a little bit more detail, maybe personalize it instead of talking about teachers in general, but talk about.
I talk about my son for a bit because he get to spend a lot of time on Legos, but he's only 5 year old and his exposure to Legos is just like 18-month old maximum. I have had 30 years of exposure to Legos, he still can do better than me. And he's an expert. I'm not. If I'm stuck, I ask him. He's 5 year old. He's an expert when it comes to Lego. What Lego is in market, what it can do, what's its capabilities. He's made more designs with the small quantity of Lego pieces that he has than I have done in all my life with all the Legos I've ever come across. You see the point? So this is what it is. He is an expert. Is genuinely an expert.
Yeah,
Can do
of
better
course
than that.
he's not thinking about himself as an expert. Just like you, when you went to that MBA, you weren't thinking of yourself as an expert. You were listening to teachers as the experts, and there's nothing wrong with that. We have to start somewhere, but it also tells Jennifer that if you can write about it, if you can explain what you've learned, you're already one step ahead of the teachers, because not only are you sharing information, which the teachers do, you're sharing models, which the teachers do. If you write a book or if you do an e-course, you're actually teaching others to do stuff you know how to do. But you have that extra advantage, which is that you have hands-on experience for many years, having worked in that whatever industry you have worked in, and you can share that. That brings all of those other people in the industry, and that's actually one of the arguments that I make in most of my sales texts, which is that you are here, you have this experience. There's a lot of people here in the industry that don't have that experience. They have other, of course, they have other perspectives, but they would like to be where you are. And if you can just help them step up from where they were when they started all the way up to where you are, even if that's just a little in your mind, the imposter syndrome playing again, it's huge for them, right? So we're publishing an audiobook with the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, and and the reason why we're doing it is exactly because we want to share what the experts already have collected in terms of lessons learned with you, so that you can get to their level quicker, right? And that's actually one of the values that authors bring to their communities, which is that you get them ahead faster than you did. Like you and I, Ed, we it took us what, months to get to understand what was the 40-hour workshop, what are the steps to do. We collected experience you had and experience I had from product design. We mixed that together. I read books about how to write books, and I tried it when writing my own book. I helped other authors write their books, and then we brought that together to the 48-hour book method. So we're actually doing that, what we are suggesting that Jennifer should do, which is we're sharing information that, maybe we don't have much more than what you guys already out there have, but that thing we have, that small thing, that 48-hour workshop, that 48-hour book method that we have, will get you here much faster. Will get you to your goal of speaking at conferences, getting a higher salary, getting better consulting gigs much faster.
Yeah.
And that's really what the book is about. It's also about convincing Jennifer that she already has that. Somewhere in her experience toolbox, there's something that will help others get there. And in chapter 2, I think that the story of the university that you have is a great story because it really illustrates that gap. And I think that the next step would be, what is the story that we can tell that illustrates the jump for the reader? To show to Jennifer that actually that's the big jump is the value you bring to your readers. And you might not even recognize it, but if you write about what you want, what you know, then that will give that big jump to the reader. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that totally. It's a lot of innovation game than invention game. So you don't have to invent your experience, you just have to innovate what you already have in packaging it. And I
Yeah,
think this book
nothing
is
new
very
is
much
under the
about,
sun, right?
yeah, yeah. So
So
I
do you
think
have a
in other
story
words, this
like
book is
that
all
in
about
mind?
packaging.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying that this book is about packaging. In other words, like, say, we just are covering the technicalities of how to convince yourself that this is the right way of packaging. I mean, why we are doing research, we already know all these things, but we, because of research, we know like what to say no to, and so that we pick and choose few things instead of 10 more things that we could have added to the content, you see.
So, Ed, do you have that story, that story of a jump in performance for the readers?
I may have to think about it because I first have to understand. Maybe if you can explain me what jump to the leader is, just maybe an example of the type, because what are you thinking when you said that?
I'm thinking. Jennifer comes to chapter 2 with the idea that, okay, I understand that it's, you know, maybe it's not that hard to write a book after all. I mean, in chapter 1 we share a few stories of how to get there and why that's important. And then in chapter 2 we focus on something else. We focus on let me just read, learn how a book can help you build your reputation as an expert, right? So the first thing you share, the first story you share is great because it tells Jennifer you don't need to be afraid. There are people out there who don't have the experience you have and are already considered experts, right? So that's the first story you share. And then the second story is, okay, now that you are not afraid anymore of telling your story, here's why it's important for you because it's important for your readers, right?
Yeah.
So uh, the story of the university professors who are
I was
experts, even.
thinking your story of no estimates would, because in my notes I put that one as an example, uh, that you saw something and then, like, what you just talked about before to earlier today, could be an example of that. What it did was basically you had that idea, but the moment you started talking about it, the moment you started, you wrote the book or started writing the book about it, you took a bold stance. That's a way of a leadership in itself. So that's one way, uh, and that's how you stand out, because nobody else talk about it. I mean, people may have doubts in their mind, but they were not taking a bold stand to make a say on it, and you did
So
that.
yeah, so that aspect of leadership, of course, contributes to expertise. So I like that story or a similar story because of that. But we also need to help Jennifer understand that leadership is important because it's important for the reader of her book. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean,
Jennifer is writing the book, right? She's
yes.
convinced. She wants to write the book. She even has a great "this changes everything" idea. She starts writing it. And then at some point she asks herself, wait a minute, this is a great idea. I know because it helped me, but how is this going to make me an expert? And I think the mindset here is that you are an expert because they get helped.
Mm, yeah, it could be, but maybe this one is a challenging for me, because my stance is again, I have my own biases, and that is that the first person you need to convince that you're an expert is yourself, and that's all matters. So once you're convinced, the whole world seems like change, because you may have heard of the scene when you buy a red car or red, I don't know, if you buy a red a red Ford something, you'll suddenly see red Fords everywhere. So when you are wearing red sunglasses, you'll see everything red. uh, that's how our life works. We see things from frame of references, and when you convince yourself, your frame of reference changes, and your mind and the life itself will filter out everything else. So you won't even recognize, like, you won't even see the presence of people who don't recognize you as an expert. It doesn't really matter, because uh,
Okay, so
I mean, that's my stance.
that and I think that's part of the story that we need to tell on chapter 2. Uh, the next step in my mind is the second phrase, or second part of the phrase of the title of the user activity.
Reputation, you mean?
It says, "Build my reputation." So
Yes. Okay.
let's get to the point where Jennifer already
Okay.
thinks she has something to share. She feels she's an expert, but now she asks herself, "Wait a minute, but how is that going to help me get invited to conferences? How is that going to build my reputation?" right? And the question is still the book, because there are many ways to build reputation. The book is not the only one. We just think it is the fastest, most effective one.
Yeah, and hence the logic that I was presenting, that the reason why book hold the top space in most of us naturally is because of those historic things that we don't even see, that the we only see the tip of the iceberg. The bottom is this, those subconscious reasons why the email will always stay, the books will always stay. When Amazon came with Kindle, people thought this is the end of the book. No, there are more books selling now than ever before. And
Yeah, exactly.
and
It's funny, right? It's
yeah,
like ebooks sell in some countries now more than physical books, but that does not mean that there's less physical books being sold.
yeah, there's
In fact, the
significantly more.
opposite.
Yeah, it's become, books have become, there are more people reading books now than ever before, and that's a good thing. Now there's huge scope, like
So
probably,
would it then
you know.
be the hook that uh, because of all of that, that's why a book will make you an expert in the eyes of others. You already think you're an expert, so that's the first part of chapter 2. Then here's how the books are important for others, and then when you share your expertise in the book, you put those two together, and then that's why you become an expert. And we could share a story of somebody who did that, right? Is that what you have in mind for chapter 2? Like, uh, here's how you can overcome imposter syndrome. The next is here's why the books are so important. And then the third part is if you put those two together, right? Overcome imposter syndrome, you are now an expert in your own mind. And the book is the best tool to get others to know about you and your expertise. Then if you put those two together, 1 + 1 = 2. Then if you write a book, you become an expert in the eyes of others.
Yes, yes. So, but the challenge for me is not to convey that message. The challenge for me is to stay away from the marketing side, because it's when we talk about reputation, my mind switch into marketing mode, because that's all I have done in all my life, like all my working life outside of the project management thingy. Marketing is all about reputation building and reputation management, but then
But
it
why should
becomes
we stay
technical.
away from marketing though?
I think it's too early to talk about marketing, because we're still, I mean, marketing is something we are teaching later in the book, but maybe this could be an introduction, that this is where marketing, you use marketing. That's the third part of the book, which is you're an author expert and an author. Others don't know it yet. That's purely a reputation building section.
Yeah.
And
So
okay,
if
this
we
could be
think
an introduction to that section.
exactly, and
Okay.
in chapter 2, we could actually share a story of how somebody has become an expert because they wrote a book and they knew how to market it, and then point to the third part of the book where there's all the teaching about how to do marketing for your book.
Right, yeah, yeah. So to me it makes sense, because they know what's coming, and
And
nothing will
that's
be a
what the
surprise.
goal of part 1 is all about, right? And then
Yeah,
we could give out chapter 1 and 2 as the lead magnet, right? If
yeah,
you read
free
chapter
chapters.
1 and 2, you should be convinced that you want to read the whole book, because
Yeah,
chapter 1 is about I believe it's possible to do. I believe that the book can have a huge impact on me. That's where we share my story and the story of other authors that have become experts and have achieved their goal of speaking at conferences. Then
yeah,
chapter 2 is about how you become an expert and overcoming your imposter syndrome. And then we link those two to the rest of the book. Like I actually have that as well in chapter 1, which is links to other chapters where we go into more details about the
yeah.
the,
I
the
I think
content.
that gave me a very clear structure. I feel pretty confident, and yeah, I know what to do next. So I think that was a great. I mean, I think I was struggling with that. I didn't even realize that I was struggling with that. And yet that
Perfecto.
was
This is why authors that are co-authoring need to talk to each other, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think that was great. Awesome. So chapter 2, problem solved.
We'll figure
What's
out
next?
next week what to do. I don't know what we should talk about next week, but we'll figure out next week.
All right. We'll come back next week with more stories on how we are writing and how we are progressing this
Yeah, because
book.
we're sharing this live. Like there's no rehearsal. This is what's really happening right now.
Yeah. And probably by the time you're watching, most of the people who are watching this video, they're watching after they already have the book in their hand. So this is the journey. This is a vlog of the journey. How probably will make less than 48 episodes to finish the book. Less than 48 hours, but um, just for you to know how we are progressing.
Absolutely.
All right.
See you next week, Ed.
See you.